Hello and welcome to this video. I want to talk about static versus instance fields. Okay, this lecture comes from my book C# for Artists, 2nd edition, and I'm in chapter 9, I believe, page 226. All right, so that's where this diagram's at anyway. Static fields, okay, or static fields, anything, static fields, properties, they are class-wide. Okay, instance fields or instance properties, right? They are specific to each instance. So if I have a static field, then I set the value to in that static field all the instances of that class or that object, okay, have access to that same value. So it changes in every one of those instances. A static value, right? A static field, if I change the value on a static field, it's available to all the instances. If I have instance fields, right, then if I change a value on a particular instance of an object, then that change is only effective in that instance. Okay, none of the other instances see that change. All right, so they have their very own copies of those instance fields. Alrighty, so let's see how we would work with this in code. Okay, so let me minimize this, and I'm going to pull up. First off, I'm going to create a project folder. I go to my projects directory, and I'm going to create a new folder. Projects, new folder. I'm going to say static versus instance fields. That's going to be the name of the folder. So let me pull up a command prompt. Now, if you don't know how to compile C# programs from the command prompt, then I've posted a video that shows you how to do that. Go ahead and look at that now. I'm just going to use I'm just going to compile these little programs from the command line. I'm going to use Notepad++ as my text editor. So first off, I'm going to change directory to my project directory, and I'm going to pull up Notepad++, and I'm going to create a new folder. Not a new folder, but a new source file. So I'm going to program file. Let me go to save as. Let me find my file. All right, desktop. Desktop projects. Give me a second here. I'm figuring it out. Static versus instance fields. Scroll down. There we go. Okay, change type to C#, source file. And I'm just going to call this, let me just call this, I'm going to call this employee.cs. All right, for better or for worse. So I'm going to start off by saying using system, okay, and public class employee. Open brace, closing brace. All right, we'll give employee some instance fields here. So I'm going to create a region. You don't have to do this. So you can name the region, right? So I'm going to say fields. Well, let's just say properties. I'll show you the difference between the two. Okay, so let me create two regions. Fields. Okay, so I have two regions here. One's called fields, one's called properties. You know, nowadays, right? I guess, I don't know, I think it was C# 2.0 or 3. Whatever. Taking a sip of coffee. You could do something like this. you would say public. You create a property. Let's say string. Right, first name, open brace, closing brace, and you could just say get colon set. All right, so that'd be a public property called first name. You didn't have to create you didn't have to specifically create a corresponding field, because doing this will automatically do that for you, right? And if I'm not mistaken, behind the scenes, the name of the field is underscore lowercase first name, first uppercase name, right? So that was automatically taken care of for you by doing this right here. Right now, if you have to do anything fancy with the longhand version, right? If you were from the old school, well, early days of C# and you haven't got out of that habit, then your code would look something like this. You'd say private, okay, string. Now you can use lowercase or uppercase. So these are tantamount to the same exact thing, right? And I'll do another video on the differences, like how these built-in types are related to the .NET classes, right? Or the corresponding .NET structures. So private string, I'll say underscore first name. All right, and then here we would have done something like get open brace, closing brace, and set open brace, closing brace. And for the get, which is the read part, right, it would say return underscore first name. Okay. And then for the set, we would say underscore first name equals value. You don't have to do that anymore if your property, and this is the property right here, if your property is just getting and setting, or just getting or just setting, right? If it's a read-only property, a write-only property, or a read-write property, and that's all it's doing is just setting and getting the value, you don't have to do all this coding anymore, okay? So that's just a little intro to properties, and this is an instance property here, right? So every time I'll create a few more. I'll do that one that way, and then I'll do this other property, string. I'll do last name, and I'll just do this the new way, right? Which is get open brace, closing brace. Well, actually, you don't do that, right? You just hit get and set like that. Okay, and that's, like I say, that's equivalent. And I don't have to do anything else. In fact, I'll make a constructor. Okay, so public employee, just a default constructor here. And what I'll do is, I will, well, what I'll do here is I'll have this, I'll create two constructors for this example. Nothing like designing on the fly. So string, first name, string. So here we can create an employee with a first name and a last name. Yes, this is very simplified. Okay, and what we'll do is we'll just call the properties, right? If I have a field, right, I could obviously set the field directly. I could say first name equals first name. And the reason why I like to put this little underscore here is because, you don't have to say this, right? It's like underscore first name equals the incoming parameters or the parameter first name. Okay. And then for the property, since there is no value, or since there is no field that you grasp, right, or that you have a handle on, that you can access, I suppose, you go through this property, and it's the same thing, right? Last name equals last name, like that. Now, this is a private, right, field. These are public properties. So let's create another constructor, which is going to be public. Okay, and it's going to be the default constructor, but this one is going to set this default constructor is going to call this constructor with two default values. I'm going to say John, comma, you probably know where this is going, Doe, right? Open brace, closing brace. So if I create an employee and I don't specifically give it a first name and a last name, it's going to create the employee with the name John Doe, for better or for worse. And this is just a demo program, so for worse, I suppose, is okay. All right, so now this is not the place to have a main method. So I'm going to create another program or another class called main class or main app, and I'm going to use this class in that class. You're getting like a bonus instruction in this video, and eventually I'll get around to the private or the static versus instance field issue, which is why I'm making this video in the first place. But let's create another file, new, and file, save as. I'm going to call this main app.cs. So you don't have to name that text, right? Just say name app cs, and then using system and public class main app, open brace, closing brace, and then now we need a main method, public static void main, just like that. And in here I'm going to create an instance of employee. So employee, I'm going to say E1 equals new employee, just like that. So that's a test of the default constructor, and then I'm going to say E2 employee E2 equals new employee, and I'll say Rick. I'll give him my name, Miller. Now, so how are we going to test these things? I'll say console write line E1 dot first name comma R. Let's see, first name plus space plus E1 dot last name, just like that. And I'll just copy this, like Control C, come down here to the next line, and then I'll just say E2 first name, E2 last name, and then we'll run this program and see what it produces. But first we got to compile it, right? So we have our C# compiler. We'll do a dir. We see we have two classes there. To run these together or to compile them, since the main app, right, the main application class is using the employee, right, and I compile these guys together in one assembly, I can do this, right? So just go here and type in csc star.cs. Another way to do it would be to create a library out of the employee class and then reference the library or the DLL file with the main app class, but I'm not going to go through all that trouble for right now. So employee 7. Oh, wait a second. What have I got going on here? Okay, newbie mistake here. I see, looking at this code, I put regions. It should just be region. And I started typing these constructors. This is not a problem, but organizationally, I want that right there. So these are constructors. I'll make another region just to delineate the constructors. So it's region constructors, and then in region. Okay, save that file, and compile. So let me just clear the screen and compile all of them. Okay, so that compiled fine. Now we do a directory dir, and we can see that we have a main app exe. So the name of the executable will take the name of the class with the main method in it. But I'm using both of these classes for the program. So now if I run the main app, let me clear the screen, then run it. You can just type main app all lowercase. So John Doe, Rick Miller, which is what we expect. Okay, so let's talk about, let's add a static field. So a static or a static property. A static field or property will be one that's shared by all instances. So let's create one that keeps count of how many employee objects we create. Okay, so I'm going to say private. Well, I could do it this way, or I could just do it with a property. Let's do it with a property, because what we want is we want to kind of set it up so that we privately can set the value and we can publicly read the value, because we don't want anybody else setting the value for us, right? So what we will do is we will say public string, let's see, we'll go int. I think this works. Okay. So public int employee count. We'll do get, which is a public, and we'll do private set, like that. So let me compile this and make sure that flies. Okay. But yeah, so let me compile this first, and then I'll go the next step. So let me just go ahead and compile all this. Okay, so that looks like it compiled fine. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying, hey, this is a public property, but the get is what's public and the set is private. So I can, you know, the class itself can set the well, let me see. Let's do this. I gotta do one other thing. Static. How about that? So static. Now, in order to do this, I have to be in my constructor. So all the time, any of these constructors, this is really the main constructor here, because even if I call the default constructor, I'm going to call this constructor. I'm going to say employee dot employee count plus plus. Okay. Now there's no guarantee when you release an object, so I should put some code in there so when when an object is released from the heap, right, or when it's garbage collected, I should go ahead and decrement that. But we'll just play with this right here. So employee count plus plus. Now I'm setting the employee, right? So let's compile this, make sure everything's okay up to this point. Okay, and that looks fine. So now in the main app, let's read it. Let's read that employee count property. So we'll say console right line employee count equals plus employee. I could have just named it count, right? I put employee count. So I can read it fine publicly, and that should work fine right there. Command save. Okay, now let's compile all this and make sure, and then run it. So compile, and then clear the screen and execute. So we get employee count equals 2. Fine. Okay, so what happens after we garbage collect? Should that be another video? I don't know. Well, let me think about that for a while. So, instance fields. My instance fields are these right here, or my instance. There's a field, right? That's a field. Okay, this is a property. Okay, it has a getter and a setter. Okay. Generally, I want to keep my fields private to the class, right? Anytime I use a field, I want to keep it private. The combination of a private field defined like this can be used with a property. That's I'd say that's the old school way of doing properties. The shorthand method of declaring a property, if this is all you're doing, if all you're doing is, you know, setting a field and returning a field as part of your property, then you don't have to do all this. You don't have to declare the field, and you don't have to do this coding. You just do this. You go public string, you know, name the property. So property names generally follow this camel case, right? Where you capitalize the first letter, and then each first letter of each, you know, syllable of the name of the property. Fields take on this underscore first, followed by a lowercase first letter, and then, you know, capitalize each successive syllable of the name of the field. All right. So these are instance fields or properties. That's an instance property. This is an instance field. The reason it's instance is it's non-static. It doesn't have the static keyword. But when I put static in there, like this, public static, you know, int employee count, then this is a class-wide property. Okay, it's a class-wide property. The same thing for a field, right? If I put private static like that, then that would be a static field. Okay. So and then I'm putting a little special twist on it. What I'm saying here is, publicly anybody can read this property, but privately it can only be set by you know, in this code right here in the class. When you're programming, it's good to project yourself into the code. You know, this, the keyword this means this object. So you think of yourself as being in this code, right? So, you know, if you're in this code, if you're in the employee code, you can set the employee count. Okay, and that's about it for private or instance fields versus static fields. I used two classes in order to demonstrate that. One was the employee class. Let me just open those up again. Okay, and it contained, for demonstration purposes, I created a private field called first name, and the corresponding property is called first name, the difference being the spelling of the field versus the property. The property uses the field in order to set the difference between, what's the difference between a property and a field really is the field maintains state, object state. The field is there to store the state of the object, right? And of course, in this particular example, I only have a first name and a last name, so the objects can only assume two states, right? I mean, can only have two different property values that are being changed. First name and last name. So the state of an object, I can change the state by changing the first name property or changing the last name property of each of these objects, right? So the field, the purpose of the field is to preserve state. The purpose of the property is to query the state and set the state. Okay? You don't usually use fields to query the state and set the state. Like I say, fields are to preserve the state or store the state. And so this shorthand method of defining a property really combines, you know, you don't have to even mess around. It's the state is being preserved in a field behind the scenes that is defined automatically by the compiler, or by the runtime system, I should say. Or maybe it's the compiler that does it. Certainly it's a compiler. And how would you tell, right? Well, when you compile your class or this source file, you can go in with the disassembler, the Microsoft .NET disassembler, and you can, you know, look at the code. And maybe I'll do that in another video so I can show you how to actually go in there and see behind the scenes what's going on. But anyway, that's it for this video. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to shoot me an email, rick@pulpfreepress.com, and I'll be glad to do a custom video for whatever you need. Alrighty, have a nice day.